Good morning, guys. This is Pastor Greg Barrett here at Trinity Life Change Church. And this morning, we're in the series of talking about exposing spiritual roots of disease. Today, we're going to talk about addiction. And guys, what I was talking about before is we understand that there are triggers. That there are emotional triggers that people deal with. There's anxiety, there's depression, there's oppression, but all of them, if those doors are left open long enough, eventually are going to end up in some type of sickness and disease. We look at people that are, CEOs of companies that have heart attacks at early age. There's an effect of that stress, on your symptom. But we also know that there's a lot of sickness and disease that medical doctors can tell you exactly what it is, but they can't tell you why it is. I can go into a hospital and they could say, "Did your mom have cancer?" "Yes, she did." "And it looks like you have cancer." "Yeah, okay, well, that makes sense." "Well, can you tell me why my mom had cancer?" "Well, no." So you can't tell me the cause. You can't tell me what opened the door. Medical science can, a lot of it, I'm not going to say all of it, will relate it, to a genetic condition, but how did they get my genes? Well, that's the unknown. So, the Word of God actually explains it. So today we're going to go ahead and we're going to start talking about addiction. And it's something that, I know if you look at downtown Seattle, it's something that plagues downtown Seattle. We have my buddies Rich and Kalen with Reach Ministries down there that are doing a tremendous outreach, and they're being very effective. And the reason I want to talk about addiction, if we're going to talk about praying for the sick, if we're going to talk about deliverance, we have to talk about addiction because it's something that a lot of people suffer from, but we have to understand what it's rooted in. And if I'm going to pray for somebody and they come up and say, "I have an addiction issue," then I need to know what's the root, and I need to go know what to go after, because you have a symptom, which is called an addiction, but you have a cause, which is usually grounded in lack of love in their life. So what does that person struggling with addiction need? They need love, right? And so in order to be able to be an effective minister, we have to be able to diagnose the conditions of people. So I'm going to open up, 1 John 4:18. And I know that Jen has the book. I know Kristen has the book. I'm going to actually be talking about Henry Wright has a book, Insights into Addictions, which I like his breakdown. He's also the one that wrote Exposing the Spiritual Roots of Disease. That is something that we're using his information as well. I'm like, hey, I'm not going to create the wheel. If these guys spent 30 years to get breakthrough in a few sentences, well, I'm going to read the few sentences and not spend the 30 years. So 1 John 4:18 says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love, it drives out fear," or it casts out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. Think about this. Fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. So if I look at the word punishment in the Greek is phobos, or from phobia, right? And phobia is causing fear, or it's forcing somebody to be in reverence to fear, right? If we're using this term in relation to God, it's a person that's withdrawing or separating from God. So I talked about sickness and disease a few weeks ago is grounded in three different things. It's separation from God and his love. It's separation from yourself, because if you don't love God, a lot of times you're not going to love yourself. And if you don't love yourself, you're not going to love people. So you're going to isolate yourself from people, and you're going to keep a distance from people. You're going to have a Facebook profile that says, "Hey, life is awesome," but really you're an introvert and you don't like being around people. And so you have to understand, it says a person who has a mind that's divided, it's unstable in all things. I believe that's in James 1:8. So they have instability, which starts off in seed form and manifests through its entire life. So it'll start off as a seed and it will actually continue to grow. Every seed demands a harvest, good and bad. The question is, are we going to deal with it before, a harvest? So 1 John 4:18 says, "Perfect love casts out fear." Well, the perfect love of the Father is already there. But do you have a perfect love of yourself? And do you have a perfect love of other people? Because those are that's the greatest commandment of the New Testament, is love God and love your neighbor as yourself. So do you love God? Do you love your neighbor as yourself? Well, you have to love yourself to be able to love your neighbor, right? But let's go ahead and open with this. I have a friend that has a celiac disorder. Now, celiac disorder is an autoimmune disease. Now, this person had it genetically. It was in their system because it's a genetic disorder, but it's also an autoimmune disorder. Now, remember when I talked about autoimmune disorders? Autoimmune disorders are the fruit of an individual who actually does not love themselves and they actually hate themselves. And hate is kind of a strong term. It's a person that walks around in guilt, shame, and condemnation, right? It's my fault. So the reason my life is the way it is because of me. People look at me a certain way. I'm rejected. They don't like me. I understand that. So a lot of times when we feel like we're the outcast one, we don't like ourselves. Now, if you keep that door to emotion open long enough, eventually things are going to come through that door. Remember, I said, whatever you access through a door has the right to access your life. You just don't have the right to choose, right? So what happened is, she didn't know, that this disorder ran through her family. And probably about 25 years old, she had a nice vehicle, ran it off a ditch, and wrecked the vehicle. And after she wrecked the vehicle, celiac disorder was triggered because shortly after that, she started eating gluten and her body had this adverse reaction to it. And it's like, oh, I understand. It runs in my body. But I asked the question, I was like, why did it get triggered all of a sudden after an accident? You've had it all your life. You've been able to eat bread, but now you have an accident and this disease that's an autoimmune disorder is now triggered in your life. Fear triggers it. Fear is a door opener. So we had the trauma of an accident, which kept the door of fear open. And through that fear, all of a sudden, the celiac disorder was manifest because there was no peace in her heart, right? And this is not it's not a condemnation thing. Again, it's understanding where these things come at. And I haven't talked to her about it, but it's something that I guarantee if we had the conversation, we could trace it back. Now, I've seen genetic disorders through prayer. I've seen them be healed to where I remember a 19-year-old girl in a hospital had Crohn's disease, and I prayed for her. I was there about 5 minutes. I prayed for her. We renounced some things. She goes in, they do the surgery, they remove part of her bowel. She's supposed to go back in 6 months. They go back in 6 months, they start testing her, and they called me a year later because they forgot about me. And they said, oh, by the way, she no longer has Crohn's. And I was like, well, what do you mean? They said, they cannot find it in her. They're like, we don't understand it. It's a genetic disorder, but it's gone. I'm like, well, I understand it. Jesus paid the price for it. But we have to understand, even with, Crohn's disease, multiple sclerosis, a lot of autoimmune disorders, they do have a source. It could be genetic where it's passed down, but even if it's genetic, it has a source, which is going to be through the emotions, right? So let's just go ahead and move on. So fear will always buffet a person to incapacitate them. Now, when it says perfect love casts out fear, and fear has to deal with punishment, the punishment is fear, and fear desires lordship in a person's life. That's where a person that has, an anxiety disorder, they have a depression disorder, they have suicidal thoughts, they're oppressed. A lot of these things come through continuous thinking that is all based in fear in their life, because fear is a spirit, and that spirit desires lordship in their lives to incapacitate that person so they cannot achieve purpose. Understand, I always say this scripture, you should know it by heart by now. In Psalm 139:16, it said that God wrote down every day of your life before one of them came to pass. So it talks about a predestination, and it talks about the potential of a future, that's prosperous, which there's a real enemy that's attempting to undermine, right? So every sickness and disease oftentimes starts off with separation or independence from God, separation from yourself, separation from people. And I also said, is just kind of in the backdrop, 3 John 2:1 says, beloved, above all things, I wish you prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. So the soul condition will equate to a physical condition. Your exterior atmosphere will equate to how you feel about yourself. If you want the outside to grow, then the inside's got to grow first. A lot of people say, well, I just want my paycheck and, I want a better paying job and this, that, and the other thing. It's like, even if you get the better paying job, oftentimes you're going to sabotage it because you haven't prepared for it. You have to prepare for it in your heart. Preparation takes on the burden of tomorrow today in order for you to step into it, because you can't step into something you don't recognize. In order to recognize it, you have to prepare for it. In order to get addiction out of one's life, you have to do the emotional work. It's not just taking the pill. It seems easy, but it'll also incapacitate you by taking the medication for it. So let's go on. Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He responded with love. So addictions develop when we continually attempt to soothe or comfort ourselves rather than resolving the source of pain. So like I said, we have to do the emotional work. Every addiction starts off as a seed, and we have to know that the attack of the enemy is subtle. In Genesis 3:1, it says that the devil was more subtle than any other creature. So we cannot walk around with guilt, shame, and condemnation just because we have thoughts in our head, right? 2 Corinthians 10:3-6, it says the challenge of thinking. Now watch this. This is just my concept of thinking. How can I walk around? Now you may have done stupid stuff based on stupid thinking, but you have to be able to start forgiving yourself, because think about this. If you have three voices that are going through you, your voice is a voice of reasoning, but a voice of reasoning responds to the voice of God and the voice of the enemy, right? And in order for us to address these issues, we have to understand that there is a spiritual realm. So there's two voices that are coming into our lives. There's a voice from God and there's a voice from the enemy. One voice will strengthen, encourage, and comfort you. The other one is always going to come in and condemn you. It's always going to come to kill, steal, and destroy, to take away from you. One's going to give you peace. One is going to steal peace. So we have to evaluate our thoughts and the fruit of those thoughts. Is it making me feel full of peace, or is it stealing my peace? Now, most people, if I talk to an addict, if I talk to anybody, they will always tell me how they feel, but they'll never tell me about a voice. Now, if I ask a person, how long have you felt this way? They'll say for a long time. And if it's been for a long time, that voice can go all the way back, or that emotion can go all the way back to childhood, which often is the case. Or here's the thing that everybody overlooks. It could have happened in utero. Well, what are you talking about? Alcoholism can also be genetic, right? But I also said there's a cause in previous genes. So it can be genetic. And if it is genetic, we have to understand the cause in previous generations. We know how to renounce those things. But if it's something that started in utero, well, we have to start praying about that. Well, what are you talking about? Well, a baby that's been in the womb for 6 months can hear the voices outside. The baby can also take on the emotion of its mother. So that's how I was born, as a rejected child. What are you talking about? My mom felt rejected. I won't talk about the circumstances, but she felt rejected. So what happened when that door stayed open long enough? That rejection and the oppression that came with it came upon my life. So if you ask me, ever since I was a little kid, I always felt like I was the outcast. Now, both my parents struggle with alcohol. So a doctor had, or my mom had actually told me that my chances of being an alcoholic were 80%. Why? Because we have alcoholism on both sides of the family. I lived through it. So the chances of me walking into that were extremely high. And they may say, well, it was in your genes. Well, I dealt with it in my genes, through deliverance. But the chances were extremely high. But if I have an issue that's in utero, and I'm born with this thing, then of course you're going to say, I felt this way. There's no voices. Eventually there's going to be voices, but we have to entertain, we have to start praying about, God, did this thing happen in the womb? Even if it did, there's the ability to renounce it and not to receive it. But in order to renounce it and receive it, we have to identify it first. I'm feeling a certain way. This isn't from God. Now, here's my question. If it's not from God, and God's voice and the enemy's voice in your rationalization, they all sound like you. So if all these voices sound like you, how do I differentiate the voices? Well, I got to have some type of discernment working in my life. And I know God's voice because God doesn't speak outside of his word, and I know the enemy is always trying to undermine God. What's he trying to do? He did it in the garden. He challenged what God said. So the enemy always challenges what God said. What does God speak about? Strength, hope, love, encouragement. So the enemy always speaks against that. So I know he's a liar. So anytime he speaks against it, I know it's him. But again, I know his voice doesn't bring me peace. So if I have a word that's from the enemy that's not giving me peace, then it came from the enemy. And if it came from the enemy, why am I beating myself over my own thought processes when it didn't come from me anyways? Think about it. Why do I feel the guilt, shame, and condemnation when it came from me and I never did it? I may have thought it, but I didn't do it, and it didn't originate from me. That's why we have to look at, those words, 2 Corinthians 10, 3-6. We have to constantly think about what we think about and ask ourselves, where are these words coming from? And what do I do about it once it comes into my life? Because if Proverbs 4:23 tells me to guard my heart, tells me to have a filter, because everything I do comes from my heart, then I got to protect the garden of my heart, and I got to protect what desires to be planted in my heart. I have to protect what I believe about myself, because what I believe about myself is what I'm gonna believe about other people, and it's going to be the very lens that I see relationships through, right? And it's going to affect what I do in life. So prosperity is a heart condition before it's a physical condition. So I have to guard my heart, and I have to go back and I have to start thinking about my thoughts, and I got to start forgiving myself for how I feel about myself, because you're not the unloved one. You're not the rejected one. If people treat you that way, they're trying to control you. You got to get them out of your life. You got to get dysfunctional relationships out of your life. So I'm going to get into that real quick before I get behind. But we have to start learning to love ourselves. We can't have thoughts in our head that God doesn't think about us. And we got to start seeing ourselves the way God sees us. That's why reading the Word of God is so important. If you deal with emotional struggles, read the book of Psalms. Psalms is an emotional book. It ministers to the heart. Start seeing yourself the way that God sees you. So let's kick this off and start getting into the addictions. I'm going to list some things off. And I know for some people, it's like, wow, he's kicking me in the knees. But again, I would not bring the topic up if I didn't deal with it myself. Like I said, I have alcoholism on both sides of the family. And so I got alcoholics that are around me. But it's something that we have to have the tools in order to help them. And we can't help people unless they want help. All we can do is encourage them. But again, if I cast something out of their lives, they're not going to be able to keep it out. I can get them free, but they got to want, to be able to stay free. So we got to go after the root cause when people are ready. Inordinate affection is one of my biggest ones. So inordinate affection, it says that we think of addictions oftentimes that are chemical addictions, but not all addictions are chemical. Many people, they're in a relationship with someone not because they have something in common, but because they have a need. So when the other person has an interest in another relationship, you cannot let them go because you have an inordinate affection or soul tie with that person. You continually and repetitiously think about this relationship over and over and over again, and you cannot get over it. And I would say it's your master, because it's all you can think about. Sometimes when people are abused, a lot of women are abused sexually, they reach out to relationships for safety. And there's not even an attraction. It's just for safety purposes. And what do? They get into a soul tie. And it doesn't matter if it's healthy or not healthy, but it's just a relationship. It's just a person that's constant in my life. And what does it do? They're in that area, that person's heart, there's still separation from God because you haven't dealt with the issue. So what are you doing? You're trying to receive love from somebody else to give you that false sense of peace. But that person may not be healthy themselves, right? So we're reaching out to a dysfunctional relationship because I have a need, which is a need to be loved, but I'm not dealing with my issue. So again, addiction and fear is separating you from God. And when we go into these relationships that are not healthy, we're further medicating ourselves, because it's not a chemical dependency, but we're medicating ourselves because we're still staying separate from God in that issue. We're not dealing with the issue. And every person that comes in their life, I get texts from some women that say, I think this is my husband. And I'm like, nope. Well, I think this is my husband. Nope. What's the root issue? You haven't dealt with the rejection issue. You haven't dealt with the pain. You haven't dealt with the abuse. And that's why you continually reach out to something that's like what God wants for your life, but it's not God. And so we latch on to every single thing. Now watch this. Go ahead and try and get them out of the relationship. You can't, because they're in a soul tie. You're not going to be able to break free. They're going to leave you, and they'll even leave the church before they leave that person. Why? Because their loyalty is towards them. Why? Because the pain is so bad that they're latching onto that individual because their need to feel loved, but it's a replacement of God. It's not God. Because if it were God, and if godly people came in your life and told you this is not from God, and you still stay latched onto it, and you don't even give it a break, and you're still sleeping with that person, and if you can't stop, it's an addiction and it's your master. So we have to look at these things, but they gotta want to be able to do something about it. So all I'm doing is I'm creating awareness that there is a root to a lot of these issues. And I don't know, Christian and Jen, like I said, if you guys want to come out and make mention, because I'm going to talk about a few different sources of addiction, but you guys can step out. So, what's behind addictions? So there's a force that's behind addiction. Like I said, it's fear. Regardless of the type of addiction, it's rooted in the need to be loved. The need to be loved takes you into a world of wrong relationships based on your rejection, your trauma issue, your abuse issue. And like I said, Christian will tell you, a very high percentage of women that come to us for deliverance have had sexual issues in their background. Some people say, I don't remember it. And then unfortunately, we get words of knowledge about certain things that have happened. And it really did happen, but it's something where people try and compartmentalize it, and push it deep into their subconscious. Remember, Proverbs 25:3 said the heart is unsearchable. There's certain depths of the heart that people will compartmentalize issues and shove them down into places where hopefully they don't have to think about it again. And that's the beginning root of dissociative identity disorder, but we're not talking about that today. So Galatians 3:1-3 is a key verse. It says, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified. Let me ask you only this. Did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by hearing with faith? Are you so foolish? Have you begun by the Spirit? Are you now, having begun in the Spirit, are you now being perfected in the flesh?" What is he saying? In order for someone to be bewitched, they have to be put under an evil spell or a lie, so they can no longer think, act, or reason in truth. They can no longer think, act, or reason in truth. It only creates emphasis on self. When you're bewitched, it creates emphasis on self, separating one from God. Now think about this. So this is a foundational root in addiction. So who has bewitched you? Who has separated you from God? And who put the focus on you? What did God say? Love your neighbor as yourself. So whatever he wants to get through you, he's going to bring to you, but he wants to know that he can get love through you, right? But when we're bewitched, the focus comes off God, comes off other people, and now it's just directed at ourselves. How do I serve self, right? Now it says, having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected in the flesh? Well, I'm saved now. I can do whatever I want, really. So you move yourself out from leadership, move yourself out from under wisdom. You're now in control and you're now making decisions because you're a Christian. Well, yeah, it's just me and God now. I don't need all this other stuff. Interesting. 2 Corinthians 13:1 says every matter is established between 2 and 3 witnesses. You need wisdom that's working in your life. You don't need to experience wisdom by your failure. And here's what happens. A lot of people come into the church, they get saved by grace, and then they start doing flesh works, right? They start thinking about self. And that's why I brought up the inordinate affection is a lot of times people think, well, I'm saved. There's a man, there's a woman over there, and I'm saved, but the work of God and the love of God hasn't been perfected in my life yet. So all of a sudden, here comes that old wound because I haven't dealt with the issue. And there's that person. And now it's got to be God because that person's in my life. Can I let you guys in on a little secret? When I first started coming to church, I came to church because a female invited me to church. And I was into the female, right? And what had happened is I ended up looking at this female. Now, understand, I had a history of dysfunctional relationships, history of them. And so I kind of figured, in the last girlfriend that I had cheated on me. Actually, the last two cheated on me. So all of a sudden I have this woman in the church. And just because she was in the church, I said, this has got to be God. Because God, if she can be faithful in all your house, she'll be faithful in the marriage. So what was my agenda for being married? I just wanted someone that was faithful. Now, that wasn't what God had for me, but that's all I would see. And nobody ever said, hey, I don't see it for you, right? Think about this. And I've said this before. Think about a real estate purchase. Would you go and buy or sell a piece of real estate if you've never done it before in your life successfully? Think about the real estate. If it's a transaction that's 500, 700,000, $1 million, would you go in and do this transaction all by yourself? Would you go to court and represent yourself in court? Well, no, I wouldn't. So you mean you would get representation to kind of walk you through this, people that have experience. I sold a few hundred homes in my day. You'd probably want to do it with somebody else that's been able to walk you through it, that's not as emotionally attached as you. So understand that getting a husband or wife, getting a spouse, is going to cost you more than a real estate investment. It's going to cost you your life. So if it's going to cost you your life and it's the biggest investment of your life, why would you do it by yourself and think, oh, I just heard from God and now I'm going to go? Why would you do it? And the church is not looking to control you. What we don't want to do is we don't want you to delay your life. Disobedience actually creates delay. And that's the enemy. When he attempts to incapacitate you, he's trying to delay the work that God wants to do in and through your life. So you have the greatest investment of your life. And you don't want to hear from anybody else. You got this. You're going to represent yourself in court. You're going to sell your own house. You're going to do it yourself because you got this. And here's what you do afterwards. I'm in real estate, folks. Do you know what they do afterwards? They call me. After they purchase the wrong house with the wrong person, they call me to clean up the mess. Well, Pastor Greg, or the general contractor side, yeah, my house is pretty messed up. I bought the house without any inspection. I let him push me around. I did this, that, and the other thing. And now I got mold in the attic. I got mold in the crawl space. And, the plumbing is all messed up. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, yeah, that's going to cost you $15,000, $20,000. Well, I don't have that, but I got this mess. Why didn't you call me? I could have just done a walkthrough prior to you purchasing it. And well, I got LP siding and looks like the regular siding. I'm like, no, that's pressboard siding. It's going to fall apart. They had a lawsuit in the 90s. I could have told you about that. I would have told you not to buy that house because I would have told you that failed siding is going to cost you on a 2,000 square foot home probably about $20,000 to replace with lap siding. Well, I didn't know that. I could have just looked at it from the front yard, saw the cedar on your house, saw the LP on the side, which is vertical, and I would have told you it was LP. Most agents can't tell you what LP siding is. Oh, but you still were pressured into it. You made the decision. You went at it yourself, or you were with somebody with the wrong agenda, and you made a $20,000 error. Well, I should have called you. Yeah, you probably should have called me. So I hear these issues all the time. And all we're saying is, if it's of God and you know it's God, then you shouldn't be afraid to tell somebody else, hey, this is God. We're going to go in this direction, right? But when you hide it and when you can't even take a break from it because other people say it's unhealthy, then there's not only an addiction, there's a wound that's behind it that's driving you into this thing. And what's the wound? Well, let's go back to the childhood. Where were you violated? Where does trauma take place? Why such a need to grab hold of this relationship? In fact, any relationship. And these are questions that I'm just asking. Only the individual, if they're honest and they're willing, are going to be able to answer those questions. But if they don't want to deal with the issue, they're going to hide the issue. They're going to change the subject. They're going to run from the issue. Let's move on. Let's talk about serotonin imbalances. So when you feel rejected or unloved, the first thing that happens is a dip in your serotonin levels. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is released out of your nervous system, and it's referred to as the feel-good hormone because it makes you feel good. So when you don't feel good based on rejection, what happens? Serotonin levels drop. So you feel off your game. So when we run into someone who's battling with addiction, we run into a person that's separate from God, themselves, people, and love, and we're dealing with somebody that has a low serotonin level. So when you're ministering with someone who's dealing with addiction, you understand they have a low serotonin level and they have a need for love. So what do I reinforce in a person's life that's dealing with addiction? Love. And it's a very impactful prayer. There's people that come up when I know that they're dealing with addiction, I come right back at them with identity and love. And all of a sudden it's like, it's this huge revelation for them, right? But it's healing power that's going into their lives. So we have to understand that person dealing with addiction, they need love. We know that the enemy is subtle, and we know if he can get you to see through the eyes of rejection, he could keep you stuck in your juices about anything, and he can cause your serotonin to be deficient. When you don't have the love of God in your life and you are deficient, you have to look for a counterfeit that will create a chemically altered state of consciousness or a false peace. So addiction keeps you in a chemical imbalance in your body due to an unloving spirit, right? Can I tell you that I was going to bring my mom out, but I know she would not come out. My mom went through St. Cabrini when she dealt with alcoholism. Well, I'm like, how much do I tell? So I'm not going to tell all of her business. Let's just say she struggled with alcohol. And my mom got free of alcohol. And it's weird because she's what most people call a recovering alcoholic almost 25 years ago. And you can drink alcohol around her, it doesn't bother. And I'm like, what was so different about your program that I see people going to inpatient, they come back out and they're still struggling. She goes, Greg, and this was a couple years ago. She told me this. She goes, Greg, I like the program in which you teach. And I said, what are you talking about? She said, I had a Jewish priest. They don't call him priest, but he was in the ministry and he had a doctorate. And she said, this Jewish priest taught me how my spirit, soul, and body all work together. And I said, so how did you get so free? She goes, I understood the source of addiction. I was like, really? And she said it was fear. And she said it was the pain of fear. And I said, what kind of fear? She goes, fear of my children. I said, what? So we weren't in wasn't a healthy marriage. But when my mom saw the abuse of her children, love was being violated through fear. Their futures were being violated. And she had to medicate it because she did not like to look at us being subjected to certain pains that she couldn't do anything about. So she decided to medicate, and she continued to medicate in the pain. Pretty soon she became addicted to it, and you could not break her off of it. My grandma was the one that actually came into the house and put the smack down and got her into rehab. She said it was the greatest thing I've ever been through. And she goes, Greg, it was God. And I said, why? She goes, because it taught me that the source of pain was in my soul, that I have a perfect spirit, but my soul is out of alignment with my spirit. She understood I was loved by God. I love myself, but she understands the working of the triune being. And she said, he went back into the ministry, but she said that teaching that impacted me, she was given a ton of homework, but she said it changed my life because she understood who she was. And she goes, the greatest thing, this is coming from mom, that you could teach people about addictions is knowing who they are in Christ. And so he didn't preach Bible, Bible, Bible. He preached identity to her so he could build her back up, but he taught her how her body functioned. And when she understood that this was rooted in a soul region by lack of love, and she could identify the cause, now she could start working on self to start loving God, loving herself, and loving people. And she had to be able to start forgiving herself and forgiving, for the decisions she made, and obviously the forgiveness of the children. If I bring it back up, sometimes there's that still bad feeling about, what had happened to the kids. But anyways, so it's just something that, is an ongoing issue. But alcoholism, really, impacted our family when we were growing up. Let's talk about dopamine. So we talked, I don't know, Jen, Chris, you want to talk about serotonin?
Sure. I could just add that serotonin, like you said, is one of the feel-good drugs, hormones, as well as, dopamine is as well. But the thing with the serotonin is when it's deficient, it's going to be the neurotransmitter that triggers the anxiety and depression. Whereas dopamine, which you'll get into, is going to be the one that's going to, it's more your motivation, your excitability. And so when you're deficient in that, you tend to get more into trouble with those ones, which I'll let you get into first before I add on anything. But even though they're both your happy drugs, they're very different.
So those of you that don't know, Kristen is a registered nurse, so she often corrects me. And I will get you the notes here shortly because I did not have time to post them. So dopamine is a feel-good nerve transmitter. Sorry, I was letting Lisa. So dopamine, it's a feel-good neurotransmitter, or it's a pleasure transmitter. So in order for a person to compensate for a spiritual deficiency, they obviously want to feel good, right? So it's released through our body through an orgasm. Let's be adults here. So it's released in our body through an orgasm. Watch this. When a person uses cocaine, really not a big thing right now, but it's a pretty good example. Cocaine gives a person the same feeling, but it's not chemically addictive, believe it or not. It's psychologically addictive. And the reason why is because when people take cocaine, they're in search of a rush. And what does cocaine do? It's a dopamine release. So it releases dopamine in your body. In fact, it releases 100% dopamine in your body, and it gives people the feeling of an ultimate orgasm. Now watch this. They've now depleted their body of all of their dopamine. So what do? They're in search of the rush. What happens? There's no more dopamine left. Do you know it takes your body 2 years to reestablish dopamine back in your body, to build it back up? So they continue to use and use and use. So they're not addictive, but it's psychologically addictive because they're in search of the feeling because of the pain. And because they're in search of that feeling, they continue to use so they can feel better, but they never achieve it because it takes dopamine levels 2 years to build back up, and they never achieve it. And like I said, this is why it's psychologically addictive, because they're chasing after that first high. And there's other drugs that are very similar, but people take drugs that are a dopamine release to feel better. And then once it's released, they continue to use and chase after it. And there's that ill satisfaction because it didn't do what they wanted them to do. That's why they incorporate other drugs that make them feel good. And it's also a stepping stone to something else. But understand, at the root of it, somebody wants to feel good about themselves, right? And they want to feel good about themselves because they've been denied love. They've been rejected. They've been traumatized. They've been raped. They've been abused. And they're trying to go to a place without people where they can feel good all by themselves. It's not the will of God, because it's rooted in separation from God, separation from their own identity, which separates you from relationships, which violates the first command: love God, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Let's go on. Cigarette smoking.
Greg, can I add something before you move on to cigarettes? Because it's not just cocaine or drugs that do that psychological addiction with dopamine release, but there's also, since, like Greg said, orgasms, the pleasure neurotransmitter.
What did you say?
orgasm. It is that intimacy neurotransmitter. So being addicted to porn or to having an affair, those give you that high to release that dopamine as well. So people chase it and it becomes that same rabbit hole like cocaine, just by getting addicted to porn and sneaking around, having those physical and emotional affairs. It's releasing that dopamine as well. And yeah, Juanita says there, shopping, eating, gambling. And absolutely, yes, food is an addiction that is big as well. And anything that makes you feel good intimately, where you're having that intimate relationship, is going to be a release of dopamine.
And that's very good. And that's why I brought up in the last couple of weeks for 1 John 2:16, talking about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. It's all self-serving. You know, you had an appetite, you looked at it, you liked it, and yeah, it's a temporary gratification, but it's all self-serving. So you guys brought up the food. I don't need to bring that up. I also I know several people that smoke, and I kind of laugh when I bring this up, because especially men that smoke, it's kind of, anyway, I'll just leave it as it is. So let's go on. So we're looking for other sources where we can be individuals. And also, Chris, I wanted to bring up, that's why if you look at rape and incest and a lot of other things, it's all for a satisfaction of the release of dopamine. So people do stupid, not just go on porn, they do stupid things, and they do it within their families, looking for the same thing. What does it do? It traumatizes people for the rest of their lives, right? So, and if we know that, where this is rooted in, obviously we know where to deal with it when that person is ready. Let's talk about, since we talked about nurturing, let's talk about cigarette smoking. And I'm going to research this out a little bit further, but I want to bring this up. Oh, okay. Thank you, Pastor Lynn Felice. So it says in nurturing for cigarettes. Now, here's what you're going to see, because it's the same fulfillment. The people oftentimes that drink alcohol smoke cigarettes. It's rooted in the same need to be loved. So people who smoke cigarettes, it has nothing to do with nicotine. Very little. I'll just put it that way. And the power behind smoking is what hits the lips, because it's something in us. It's a stimulation that makes us feel good when our lips touch things, that there's a sensitivity for nurturing. So nurturing is needed in order to feel love. It's the sucking reflex of eating, of something touching the lips. It has a nurturing effect on somebody that makes them feel good. So you cannot walk away from any addiction without feeling loved. When we try with willpower, well, I'm not going to do this, and it's just willpower. Willpower is no power. Then we go over to something else, and we transfer the addiction onto something else. Why? Because you cannot fill the void of being loved with some type of chemical substance. It doesn't work. So people call it a cross addiction for the same end result. Now watch this. People that drink alcohol, now they will go to sugars. Why would they go to sugars? Because within sugars are carbohydrates, and carbohydrates is a low grade form of alcohol. So if they're trying to get off alcohol, what are they doing? They're eating a bunch of candy, they're eating a bunch of sweets. And what are they doing? They're continuing medicating themselves. So I was going to make a comment on that, because I've seen people that are trying to get off alcohol. They come over to my house, they're eating candy nonstop. And oftentimes, if they're not grounded in church, if they're not over at my house eating candy, then they're usually at their house going back to the same old thing. But it's one thing or another. So it's a cross addiction. You cannot eliminate any addiction, in a person's life without not just the love of God, but the love of God in the area that person was wounded. Remember, having a broken heart means there's a separation in the heart. If you look up when Jesus said he came to heal the brokenhearted, brokenheartedness means trauma. And trauma is a striking so hard that separates a person's identity, so much so that they don't know who they are. It's within the separation is where the enemy dwells, and he continues to create separation in a person's heart. So they continue to use, or they continue to get involved in cross addictions. They continue to get in dysfunctional relationships to try and feel love, but they're looking at every single source to try and put their heart back together. But the only one that can do it is Jesus. They'll kind of, run the gamut, but they'll eventually realize, if they have someone like you in their lives, that it's only Jesus. So Ephesians 5:18, I'm going to move on. Ephesians 5:18 says, and be not drunk with wine wherein there's excess, but be filled with the Spirit. Jesus is on this word right here. It's saying, be not drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. What's within the Spirit? Spirit of peace, Spirit of love. And what is it saying? You don't need the wine. What you need is the Spirit of God, and you need the love of God in your life. The root behind addiction is the need to be loved. I continue to say that. And the need for a dopamine rush or a chemical adjustment, in people use because of their need for a chemical adjustment that is not from God. So God created you so that when you love him, you love yourself, you love others, your body will release the proper hormones and neurotransmitters to make you feel good. So if I just end up in a loving relationship with God, not just the love of God, but understanding in that place of trauma, the place of striking, that God loved me, even in that place, that God didn't forget about me, that I wasn't alone. You're saying when I allow God and his love to go into that place, that he could set me free from addictions. That's what I'm saying. Here's the issue. We try and cater to everything else, but we try and leave that issue alone. And that's what is called a stronghold. A stronghold violates trust in God, right? Strongholds violate trust in God because it's not submitted to the cross of Jesus. And a lot of times we have Christians that look happy, life is awesome, but then there's that one thing that's not hitting in their lives. And then all of a sudden I'm like, why is there no power in a certain area in a person's life? It's because there's a wound. Now, that's why I bring up John 8:32 all the time, because people jump and shout. And it's true. But when John 8:32 says, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free, knowing is a personal experience with the truth. Did you hear me? That's why the love of God needs to go into that issue of trauma, to experience the truth in that situation, that you were not forgotten about, that you were not left, you were not abandoned, you were not unloved by God. You weren't unloved. You weren't alone. You weren't forgotten about. That's why it's so important for us to take people through inner healing, because in the place of trauma, I need you to see Jesus. I need you to see him. I was being driven home by a very intoxicated grandmother. And I was so angry at my parents because I was like, why did they leave me with this crazy lady? And I felt abandoned. All these negative emotions, just anger, manifested through my life. And that was at 8 years old. It didn't start at 8. I was cursing the womb, but it fueled the fire, and it validated the lie in my life. And it forced me to evaluate relationships where I had to serve myself. I had to seek for myself, and it was me first. But understand, I walked through life with these feelings because I was angry at the situations that parents, grandparents had put me into. And that's why when I was driving home at 8 o'clock with an intoxicated grandmother, and I carried this wound my whole life, the Lord showed me I was in the back right seat of a Cadillac. Jesus was in the middle. My brother was on the other side. And he kept putting his arm around me, tapping me on the chest. He said, it's going to be okay. She went to hit a car. He grabbed the steering wheel. I don't know how long his arm was, but he grabbed the steering wheel, prevented us from hitting a car. I had always asked my entire life, how do we get home without hitting a car or hitting somebody? She couldn't even put the key in the door. She couldn't even put the key in the ignition. We had to help her. I'm like, why would I do that at 8 years old? I was just trying to help. But I was putting the key in the ignition, driving myself to my own death, right? But I'm in the back seat my entire life, 40 plus years, carrying all these bitter emotions towards people that carried in other relationships. And Jesus had to go back to the place and say, I didn't forget you. I love you. And he not only loved me, he showed me how he protected me from hitting people, hitting other cars, and he got me home safely. So what did it do to that bitterness, that rage, that anger? It said that everybody could have left me in that moment. They could have forgotten about me, but I was still on Jesus' mind. So much so, he decided to get in the car with me that night. How did healing come into that place? Because I knew the very place where I was hurt, he came into that wound. What happened? I had a personal experience of the love of God in that situation. And what happened? I was set free from bitterness, set free from anger, set free from judgment, set free from rage. I used to get in a lot of fights. Why? I was angry because of situations like that, because people put themselves and their agendas above me. And God said, no, I'm with you, right? When I say you'll know the truth, you have to have a personal experience with the truth of God in order for the healing of God to come into that place, not just a general blanket, but to come into each crack, in each crevice in your heart where people have damaged you, where they violated you, and they've traumatized you. You have to have an experience. And without that experience, you're going to continue to carry on things, and you're going to continue to drink the wine and refuse the Spirit of God who desires access into those places in life, right? This is my last point. I know we're running long. It says in Luke 11:21 through 26, it says, when a strong man that's fully armed guards his own house, his possessions are undisturbed. This is talking about a believer, right? But it's saying when a strong man, actually, it's talking about the demonized in a believer's life. But when a strong man fully armed guards his house, his possessions are undisturbed. So when addiction, watch this, is in a person's house, that spirit of addiction has all of his possessions that are undisturbed in that house. We are all temples of the Holy Spirit, all of humanity. We're the temples, but somebody else moved in based on a wound. Addiction moved in, right? So addiction moved in, and everything addiction owned is now undisturbed. Why? Because it's running the house. Let me give you a picture. The true person, right? The true person, the true identity is in the basement, locked in a corner, eating hungry man meals in the dark. And the strong man's upstairs watching TV, got his foot up on the coffee table, has unlimited access to the refrigerator, got the power on, doing whatever he wants to do. Why? Because he has access, and everything in his house is on lockdown and it's undisturbed, right? Now watch this. But it says, but when someone stronger than he attacks him and overpowers him, the Holy Spirit, he takes away from him all of his armor. What is his armor? It's coping mechanisms. What are your coping mechanisms? What do you go to when you don't feel good? Those are flesh things. Fear and anxiety. What do? You isolate. You keep yourself away from people because you're an introvert. So there's coping mechanisms, right? That we talk about in 2 Corinthians 10:3-6. It says that our weapons of our warfare are not in coping mechanisms in the flesh. And it says he attacks him and he takes away from all his armor on which he has relied. What does he rely on? And distributes his plunder. So he takes away the addiction. He takes away the poverty. He takes away the hardship. This is the Holy Spirit when he goes into the house. He takes it all away. He takes away the pain. He provides healing in the womb, right? And then Jesus said, he who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters. He's talking about the enemy, right? He said, if the enemy's not for him, he's against him. And if he's not gathering with the spirit of gathering, he's trying to scatter. What did I say the enemy's trying to do? He's trying to come in and divide the spoils of your house, right? Verse 24, when the unclean spirit goes out of a man, it passes through waterless places, seeking rest and not finding any. It says, I will return to my house. So the enemy considers humanity his house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds it swept and put in order. And then it takes along 7 spirits more evil than itself, and they go in and live there. And the last state of that man becomes worse than the first. It says that the enemy is going about seeking rest. Here's the thing I giggle at. I was chuckling at it this morning. When I'm at peace, the enemy is tormented. Did you hear me? When I'm at peace with the Spirit of God in my life, the enemy is tormented. He's seeking rest. Yeah, he uses people to try and mess with me, to try and get back in the house. He's always going to try and get back in the house, but I'm not his house anymore. 26 years ago, he got kicked out, right? And he's still, because I'm, this salvation, this deliverance is a process. Philippians 2:12. There's areas that we can continue kick him out. When you're at peace, the enemy is tormented. When you're being tormented, the enemy's at peace. He's at rest in his house. Well, I'm not going to allow him to be at rest. especially in my life. So I'm going to continue to challenge my weaknesses. I'm going to continue to challenge thought processes that don't line up with the Word of God. I'm going to continue to ask myself about my own coping mechanisms. Why do you do what you're doing? If I can't sleep at night, why can't I sleep at night? What is giving me unrest? Because whatever is giving me unrest is giving the enemy peace. And I'm not going to give him that stool to sit on in my life. I'm not going to give him that platform, right? So I may know the strong man in a person's life, but I cannot remove him until I remove all the things that give him power. You cannot get rid of anything in your life without removing its source of power, and its source of authority that you gave over to it. That means we got to go back and we have to challenge a lot of the causes for our wounds. People want healing without revelation. Everybody wants it just to go away. They want the symptoms to be removed from their lives, but they don't want the cause to be revealed. They want to go down to, deliverance in another church because, they don't want to know their issues. Well, that's why I'm pretty transparent about my issues, as far as my past, to make it acceptable for men to at least approach me and say, I did that too. In fact, I'm struggling with it right now. Here's the thing about deliverance. If I don't have a victory in my life in addiction, which I do, I actually have the addiction through my mom. It's an inherited. When my mom beat addiction, I claimed it. Remember, I was told that my chances of being an alcoholic were 80%. When my mom beat addiction, not through willpower, but through faith and understanding who she is. She was taught, like I said, by a Jesuit priest. She understood her triune being, spirit, soul, and body. When she got the revelation of who she is, when she got the revelation of the love of God, what did I do? My mom beat the cycle of addiction that ran, I can count all the way up to my great grandparents, where rejection and alcohol ran. My mom beat the cycle. All I did was I claimed my mom's freedom and I claimed her victory. And what happened? The grace came on me to beat it, right? So I claimed that thing and I was able to inherit and move through. Why do I bring that? Because you can never lead somebody out of a prison that you're still in. That's why it says the blind can't follow the blind. They're both going to fall in the pit. If you haven't beaten alcoholism, how are you going to get somebody else out? It's like the 7 sons of Sceva trying to cast out a demon. How are you going to cast it out when you haven't cast it out of your own life? That's why I say if somebody's going to be a leader, in the church, you have to be able to go through deliverance. You have to be able to get these issues out of your life. Because if it's in your life and you go to cast out of somebody else's life, that spirit's going to say, well, it's still in your life. Why would I go? You don't have the power to get me out, right? And I've heard that from the demonic several times before they left. But we have to be able to carry these victories. The first one is a victory over addiction. Once you beat the addiction and you beat that spirit, then your testimony will transfer into somebody else's life, and the grace that was made available for you will transfer, just like it transferred onto me from my mom. That victory will transfer into their life, and it'll be able to break them free, but they got to be willing. So we have to understand that addicts have a kingdom that's operating in their lives. Now, we remember, like I said, everybody's a temple of the Holy Spirit, and they're not in control of their house when they have an addiction. They have another Lord and another strong man working in their home that's stronger than them. So if they're that little person, then we need to be able to make that offer, right? And in order to get any addict free, the first step is loving them. We got to learn to love them. We got to be able to learn to accept them for what they are, right? Or what they're dealing with. And once we can establish a relationship through love, we can nurture that relationship, and we can start removing the layers in the onion and start breaking them free. But they have to understand that they're valuable, right? We have to be able to dig through the dirt in the hearts of people, see the gold and pull it out and show them that they're worth something. In order for them to walk out, we have to be able to love them. God has put life and death in front of everybody. He has. And he's allowed everybody to make a choice without him hindering it and without the enemy hindering it. Everybody has a choice. And the first step in walking out is making a choice that I don't want to live this life anymore. And when people make that choice, he will put people in your life, healthy people, to help walk them out of their addiction. Trinity Life Change Church. If there's people that are dealing with an addiction issue, you bring them to church. And when you bring them to church, they're going to experience the love of people that'll introduce them to the love of God. And ultimately, it's going to get them free. But the first step is for them to acknowledge. I'll wrap up with this testimony. And you guys heard it. I was in the grocery store. I was talking to a guy who runs a secular, AA, and he was wearing a t-shirt that said former addict. I said, that's awesome. We started talking. And once I got to the front of the check stand, the lady in the check stand heard me talking. And when she heard me talking, she said, I wish my husband did 60 days of inpatient versus the 30 he did. She goes, because he's still messed up. And God gave me a word, but I'm not going to go into it. And I said, he could have done 120. It wouldn't have helped. And she looked at me. She was, what? I said, lady, your husband has a broken heart. And she sat there and looked at me. She was, give me your card. I have to call you. I have to talk to you. I didn't come at her, hitting her with the Bible or anything else. I just very quick, was in the check stand, had to get home. Kristen was cooking dinner. I said, he has a broken heart. I says, he's been denied love. And it's that simple. He's medicating it. And she's like, oh my God. It was like you could see the revelation just hit her. I said, that's the cause. Now I knew the cause. And I knew the life she was living. And I knew that they were introverts. They couldn't go out because he always wanted to go in the bar. He was that bad. God showed me he was that bad. But he was that bad because he'd been rejected that bad. And he was denied love that bad. And nobody was a constant. And even his wife could not love him enough to get that thing out of his life. He needed Jesus, right? And for me, it was just simply throwing the bait out there, making an introduction. And you can't say that God didn't send people in your life to get you out of your mess. He did. Has she called me yet? No. But if they do call, I'm believing in Jesus' name they will, then we can get those people free. So how do we get people out of bad habits? We give them a decision so they can make new ones. And God will not heal you or deliver you against your will. So that's why I tell women, don't send your wives to me for deliverance. Well, I'm here because my wife sent me. It's like, it's going to be ineffective. They have to want it, right? They have to want it. And if they want it, God will meet them there. So Juanita, you had a question.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment, and celebrate recovery. That's you'll see, when we ask, like, if you're a newcomer or if it's your first time there, you'll see people vamp in on them, because we know that when you're coming in to celebrate recovery, that you're coming in wounded, or that there's things that you're dealing with. So we want to make a connection. And I also know that for our church as well, like when I came into church, the women came at me with love, and they celebrated me. They made me feel welcome. And that's why I really latched on to Life Change or to our church, because of the Holy Spirit that was outpouring from them on into my life at a time that I needed that. And that's where God had sent me, and to get that love, because I was, and it was his love, and those people in my life, that, like, we need to go, you always say we need to go where we're celebrated, not tolerated. And that's so very true. We need to walk out life together with people that are healed, or that are being healed, that can show us when we're lacking or hurting or looking to fill that void, how to do it in a healthy way, how to do it searching out the Holy Spirit and searching out the things of God, so that we can know our identity, so that we can stand firm in his promises in us, and be able to kick out the strong man and keep him out. Because like you said, it's always going to be a process of always working out our salvation and staying, especially as being a person in recovery, we have to work out our recovery every single day. We have to stay, our flesh has to die every single day.
I agree. And the enemy is always going to go after old wounds, and I know that from experience. But once we get strong, in those areas, then the enemy has very little pull in that area. And it's just like, we gird our faith in those areas of weakness. And that way, when it comes under attack, we have enough faith and enough trust in God that we're not going to fall prey to it. But it's something that, we continually have to renew our minds to. And I didn't talk about that. Deanna.
So much of what you said today was a lot me, but I remember the first time I went to CR I think it was like, and I had this thought pop in my head. When my mom had me, she was told that she was going to lose her kidneys. So, it was kind of an unwanted thing, because my dad didn't want her to have me because he didn't want her to lose her kidneys. And by the time I was 5, she lost total use of her kidneys. And so I hadn't thought about that like ever. You know what I mean? Since, I don't know, I was a little child and everybody kept saying that to me. But I mean, I'm 40 plus, and it just popped in my head the first time I went to recovery, and I was like, what is this? And then I thought about what you said again, and then I had my own son. They told me he was going to have Down syndrome, and they wanted me to get rid of him because he's my first child, and I was older, and they were like, you don't need that kind of stress in your life. Why don't you just get rid of this kid? And I was like, no, it's against my religion. I won't do that kind of stuff. I don't care how he's going to turn out. I just couldn't do it. And then he turned out, he doesn't have Down syndrome, but he does have issues. And so all of that stuff that you were saying is like, oh my gosh, this is like so the kind of stuff that's happened to me. But it seems like it's kind of generational too at the same time. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, it's kind of like, I remember when you guys first came to church and I was doing the first steps, and I asked a question, and I said, has anybody ever seen a spirit, or has anybody ever been paralyzed at night? And I remember your hand went up real slow. And, and the reason I asked that question is because everybody thinks that it's only them that these weird things are happening to. And I wanted to and I called it the gathering of the misfits, and let people know that their situation, not to take away anything from it, but it wasn't unique. It's like, you're not the only one that's walked down this path. And so that's why there's certain issues that I know I like to bring up, because people don't want to talk about them. And I want to be transparent, because I know through my transparency, and I'm not ashamed of it, because here's the thing, I've never grown. And let's just talk healing. And I know I brought this up, and I think Tracy had a comment about it. When I first, a long time ago, I knew I was called to a healing ministry, and you hear all about these great God's generals, or God healed through it, and all these testimonies of amazing things. And it's like, they're unreachable, because I'm not as good as these people. I don't love God like these people. And so it's awesome that God's doing these things and use these generals in that way. But for me, it's unreachable. And then all of a sudden, this Tim story comes across my screen, and he said, the first couple of people I prayed for, they got worse and they died. And I've seen him being used in a powerful way. And I'm like, I can listen to this guy. Why? Because he started admitting his faults and failures, and I know he's been divorced, and I know he's gone through some issues, but you can't deny the gifting that was on his life. And when I saw the gifting, and I saw that he was willing to admit, a lot of his shortcomings, I'm like, I can listen to this person. And I always remember that I don't always want to, for me, teach a picture of perfection. I want to be transparent to say, hey, I started here and I've grown so much in certain areas. And there's areas I'm still working on. You can ask my wife. But I wanted to be able to be transparent. And what it does is it allows someone like Deanna and Josh to come out and say, I dealt with it too. And it wasn't an isolated incident. Oh, I see that other people have already walked down that path. They dealt with the issue. They beat it. There's an anointing. There's a victory that they carry that I can now inherit through that testimony, because that mercy will be transferred onto my life. And that's exactly it. It's being able to bring up issues that we've dealt with. And I know I got family that sometimes watches this, so I got to be careful, because I don't want to call anybody out. But here's the thing. You can't judge my family, because I can look at everybody's family here and say, everybody's got some of those people in the family that are in a different stage of renewal, because I'm going to say, speak life over them. They're at a different stage of renewal, but we all deal with these struggles in families, right? And I have family members that have died because of medication. That's been generational. There's been cycles that has hit every generation, and my plan is to eventually go after them. But these things do happen, right? So for me, it's just bringing this up. And what we're going to get into, we're going to start talking about cancer. We're going to start talking about all the issues. And it's all based on 3 John 2:1, beloved, above all things, I wish you prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. We're going to get into this triune being. Yeah, God wants to heal you. We'll talk about the altar ministry. We'll talk about the emotions and deliverance, but we also want to take it to the next step. How do your emotions affect your flesh? And how do we go back to the cause in every single one of them and dismantle it and start getting people completely restored? And that's the goal here. It's just having these conversations to, I think, again, when we don't do anything about evil, we don't know how to fight it, we become dismissive of it. We start normalizing, oh, cancer, you're going to die. No, but what if you know where cancer comes from? What if you know if it's a virus that's growing? Oh, what if you know that there's a spiritual force behind that? Oh, then you know how to fight it, right? And that's all we're doing, bringing up certain topics that for me are of interest. I've been studying lately, and I just want to be able to go after it to be able to equip the church so they can be made perfect, right? For the work of the ministry, to equip you. So when you're dealing with somebody, you're like, oh, let's ask the question and let's find the cause. Maybe we could do something about it. You're not a glorified counselor, but again, if you know the cause, then you know what to pray for and you know what to go after. So that's all I got for today. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording and then we'll go through some announcements.